Very much, Deputy Boyd Barrett.
Orla, could I just briefly welcome the political students of Sallynoggin Further Education College who've come into the Dáil today. And I suspect young people interested in politics would hope to get from political representatives clarity and clear principles on important issues. And can I suggest to the Minister that when it comes to this so-called expert commission on water, that what we've in fact got and are getting from this government and Fianna Fáil is a monumental political fudge designed to save the blushes of Fine Gael and most particularly of Fianna Fáil and leave the door open for the future reintroduction of water charges on the basis of this so-called excessive water charge. Minister, for the last 2 years, in unprecedented numbers, the people of this country who've been assaulted with austerity and injustice have taken to the streets and said they do not want household water charges, full stop. The one useful thing in this report is it confirms something that we and the people on the streets have been saying. Ireland does not have a problem of excessive household usage. In fact, we use 20% less water per household than Britain does, who've had charges and meters for many years. So there is no excuse or justification on the basis of water conservation for water charges. Irish people are conscientious in their use of household water. And it is indeed agriculture and industry who use the vast bulk of water, not households. So, Minister, does this government understand a simple thing called democracy and the will of the people who've said they don't want domestic water charges? Do they understand there is now no justification for domestic water charges? Do Fianna Fáil understand that people do not want water charges rolled up into another regressive tax by linking it in with property tax? I don't know if Bertie Ahern suggested that idea to you, but if he did, you want to think very seriously about rehabilitating Mr Ahern. There's a clear mandate on this Dáil. So when, Minister, are you going to stop the delaying, stop the obfuscation and simply accept the democratic will and mandate of the people to get rid of household water charges, establish the right to water as a human right and pay for the urgently needed investment in our water infrastructure and conservation through progressive taxation and indeed by making people like Sarah, the property vultures and other corporate vultures pay their taxes instead of consistently screwing ordinary householders?
Thank you, Deputy Minister, please.
Welcome the students from Sallynoggin. You've come to this is the assembly where people deliberate, sift the evidence and draw conclusions after careful consideration. Unfortunately, Deputy Boyd Barrett tends to reach his conclusions without looking any of the evidence. And what we have here is a very valuable document providing evidence for us. And it does deal with the issues such as you raise, as what's the nature of the right that might be there for water? What's the best system of charging? And interestingly, they recognise that the best system in terms of managing it would be to have volumetric metering and so on, but they recognise that the political realities are such that we have to have acceptance for whatever form of charging that's introduced. And they point the road to what acceptance would be built upon, and would be built on principles of fairness. One of those principles of fairness is that people who use water excessively could not expect the general taxpayer to pay for that behaviour. Equally, they say that people who have group schemes and other schemes, they should be treated equally. They say that people who paid in good faith, and more than 60% people did pay, they recognise their civic duty. Not everyone decided that they wouldn't pay a legally established charge, that they should be treated equally fairly. So there's a lot of food for discussion here, and we need to make sure that as we evolve a system that will deal with a water network which needs 5.5 billion, which is immensely important to our ambition to attract new employment, to provide a social underpinning to our growing communities and our new areas. This is an important asset, and we have to deliberate on the expert provision input that is being provided here. And I think the Deputy tends to draw his conclusions, just looks into his own heart and decides what's the best. We need to sit down in a mature way and deliberate over the evidence, and that's what I look forward to do. And I think that's what the nature of democracy. It isn't those who shout loudest or who protest who will determine. It is the elected people on a balanced basis sifting the evidence and making decisions for our community in the best long-term interests of the country.
Minister, please do not insult the intelligence of the people who took to the streets over the last 2 years. You see, the difference is they did their research. They did their research a long time ago. You never produced any research to back up false claims that these charges would somehow reduce household water usage and that they were necessary to do so. I've just quoted you real research, real facts, real comparisons that have now been confirmed by the Water Commission, but which we told you 2 years ago. We use 20% less water per household than Britain, who has charges. Therefore, charges do not reduce water charges. It's simple, it's a fact, it's a straightforward comparison. I suggest, Minister, you do your research. So I would ask you, given that, will you now simply accept the will and the intelligence of the people who've taken to the streets? Because they, Minister, want conservation as much as you do.
Thank you.
If you want an incentive, for further conservation, why don't you introduce an actual conservation grant? An actual conservation grant which actually encourages people to put in water-yielding devices. You haven't done that, ever. Right? So you're spoofing when you say you want water conservation. What you actually want is to impose a regressive and unfair tax on householders, and the people will not be conned. Let me tell you, Minister, if you don't know, the people will be on the streets in February again if you don't accept their will and their intelligence on this matter.
Minister, please.
This is a valuable report, and we're setting up a committee. I think the Deputy, in fact, is involved in the committee himself, so he'll have ample opportunity to air his views. But I think the report very shows that, one, metering did reduce leakage. It shows that that has worked. It endorses the idea of setting up a national utility and removing the responsibility from the local authorities, which was the old way. It endorses the value of that approach. It supports the polluter pay principle, that people who use excessively ought to pay, and the general taxpayer, who should pay for most of the usage, normal usage, shouldn't pay for excessive usage. So, it endorses a lot of very valuable principles, and I think the Deputy, the same as every other Deputy who's a member of that committee, will be able to tease this out and come back to the Oireachtas so that we can make final decisions. And I think that's the way the people of Sallynoggin would expect us to behave as elected representatives who have a duty to make sure that the decisions we take have looked into the long-term ability of this country to fund a water system that meets the needs of our citizens, and that's what we hope will happen through this process.
Thank you, Minister.
Um,